Hello and welcome to this edition of the Chullin Daf edition, and we're in Daf 39. So I'll just finish off the sentence from the last Daf. But with regard to non-sacred slaughter outside the temple, the intent of the owner does not invalidate the slaughter. Also, with regard to deriving the halacha of non-sacred slaughter outside the temple from the halacha of slaughter of sacred sacrificial animals inside the temple, we do not derive it in this manner. And Rabbi Eliezer comes to say that we derive the halacha of non-sacred slaughter outside the temple from the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple. So what does this mean? Yalfinein chutz mibnim. Although idol worship is a rite performed outside the temple on a non-sacred animal, nevertheless, the Torah draws a parallel between idol worship and temple rites. The verse states, "He who sacrifices to the gods other than to the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed," in Exodus 22:19. From here, the sages derive that acts are deemed a mitzvah when performed in service of God, and prohibited when performed for idol worship. And that's from the Avodah Zarah 51a. Since the verse compares the two, neither of one can be derived from the others here, Avodah Zarah 50a. And therefore, the intent of a Gentile invalidates non-sacred slaughter. And Rabbi Yossi comes to say that even inside the temple, in a case where the owner has improper intent and the other person performing the slaughter, we do not say that the intent of the owner invalidates the slaughter. That's, if I'm understanding it, if the person has improper intent inside the temple, it doesn't invalidate the slaughter. It was stated as an Amoraic dispute with regard to one who slaughtered an animal in order to sprinkle its blood for idol worship. In a case where one slaughters an animal for the purpose of idol worship, even if he did not intend to worship the idol with the actual act of slaughter, but rather intended to worship it, but rather intended to sprinkle its blood or burn its fat as idol worship, it's prohibited to derive benefit from it, like the offerings to the dead, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Nevertheless, if during the slaughter he intended to receive the blood or to take it to the idol, the slaughter is not disqualified. As with regard to sacrificial animals, is such intent considered an action? But with regard to idol worship, it is considered meaningless. Rambam Sefer Kedush, Hilchos Shechita 215, and the Maggid Mishnah there, Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 4:1. Now, I write that the dispute applies specifically to a Jew who intends to sprinkle the blood for idol worship himself. In contrast, if his intent was that of a Gentile, that a Gentile sprinkled the blood for idol worship, both sages agree that it has no effect, as one cannot transfer intent to the action of another. So, because if it's yourself, it seems to, if it's yourself, then because you have that intent. As it says here, as one cannot transfer intent to the action of another, and there is no agency in this manner. And the Rashba holds that if one who slaughters intends to sprinkle the blood for idol worship, we can see that deriving benefit from the animal is forbidden, because that intent renders him a transgressor. And rather, the dispute is in a case where the intent was that of a Gentile, that a Gentile was sprinkled blood for idol worship. And even in that case, Rabbi Yochanan holds that intent can be transferred from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite, to Rabbi 1:1. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to disagree, saying he can transfer intent or benefit of idol worship. Rabbi Yochanan says the slaughter is not valid, and the benefit from the animal is forbidden. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says the slaughter is valid, the right benefit from the animal is permitted. You've got a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Lakish. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said it's not valid, and he can't benefit from the animal. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says it is valid. The sacrifice, the slaughter is valid, and it is permitted. Just first note that although it's permitted to eat the flesh of the animal, the Jewish slaughter the animal for idol worship is liable to be executed. That's interesting. So even though it can eat it, apparently it says that the one who did the slaughter, the Jew did slaughter for idol worship, is liable to be executed. The Gemara elaborates. Rabbi Yochanan says the slaughter is not valid and benefit from the animal is forbidden. He holds that one transfers intent from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite. If while slaughtering a sacrificial animal, one intends to perform one of the other sacrificial rites in an improper manner, the offering is invalidated. Rabbi Yochanan holds that we derive the halacha of non-sacred slaughter outside the temple from the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple. Since that intent invalidates the slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple, and the slaughter of non-sacred animals outside the temple as well. Rish Lakish says the valid slaughter is valid, and deriving benefit from the animal is permitted. He holds that one does not transfer intent from one of its sacrificial right to another sacrificial right. Therefore, while slaughtering the animal, only intent to perform the slaughter improperly invalidates the offering. But intent to perform another sacrificial rite improperly does not invalidate the offering. So because the intent is another sacrificial rite, and he's saying you can't transfer from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite, it does not, right? The intent of another sacrificial rite does not invalidate the offering. Rish Lakish holds that we do not derive a halacha of non-sacred slaughter or the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals that's inside the temple. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish follow their standard line of reasoning as is stated. If one slaughters a sin offering for its own sake, shechata lishma. This refers specifically to a sin offering or practical offering that are disqualified if slaughtered not for their own sake. By contrast, all offerings slaughtered not for their own sake are fit to be sacrificed, although the owner does not fulfill his obligation. 2a. But with intent to sprinkle its blood, not for its own sake, but for the sake of another type of offering. So what does this mean? Shechat lishma, lizvil dama shalom lishma. If one slaughters an offering for its own sake, with the intent to sprinkle its blood not for its own sake, the offering is disqualified. This is because one transfers intent from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite. It's as though the intent he had while slaughtering the animal was for the intent that he had while sprinkling the blood, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So you're slaughtering an animal, you're going to use that blood for another sacrificial rite. That you can't do. It's disqualified. Rambam Sefer Vod Hilchot Pesudei Magdushin 15:10. For the sake of Rabbi Yochanan says that the offering is unfit, and Rabbi Lakish says the offering is fit. So you've got the difference again. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. One saying fit, one saying not fit. The Gemara elaborates. Rabbi Yochanan says that the offering is unfit. He holds that one transfers intent from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite, and the reason is that we derive the halacha of slaughter, not for its sake, from the halacha of ten of pigul. Mechash vin ma'avoda la'avoda, gam rinan mimacha sheves pigul. In other words, the fact that one transfers intent from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite is based on the model of pigul. In the case of pigul, one slaughters the offering with the intent to sprinkle the blood beyond its designated time, and one who eats is liable to receive kaveh. Therefore, if one slaughters a sin offering with the intent to sprinkle the blood not for the sake of the sin offering, the offering is disqualified. And performance of one sacrifice with the intent to sprinkle blood of the offering beyond its appointed time. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says that the offering is fit because they hold that one does not transfer intent from one sacrificial rite to another sacrificial rite, and the reason is that we do not derive the halacha of any other improper intent from the halacha of intent for pigul. The Gemara knows, and it is necessary to state the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish in both cases, as if it was stated only with regard to that case of one who slaughters an animal in order to sprinkle his blood for idol worship. Perhaps one would conclude that it is specifically in that case that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish states his opinion that the slaughter is valid. Due to the fact that we do not derive halacha non-sacred slaughter outside the temple from the halacha of slaughter right inside the temple, but in a case of one who slaughters an offering for the sake of another offering, where we would be deriving the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple and the halacha of another case of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple, and there is not conceit of Rabbi Yochanan that this offering is unfit. If the dispute was stated with regard to this case of one who slaughters an offering for the sake of another offering, perhaps one will conclude it's specifically in this case that Rabbi Yochanan said that the offering is unfit, because the whole one derives the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple from the halacha of another case of slaughter the animals inside the temple. But in that case, of one who slaughters an animal in order to sprinkle its blood for idol worship, that the offering is fit due to the fact that halacha of non-sacred slaughter outside the temple are not derived from the halacha of slaughter of sacrificial animals inside the temple. Therefore, there is a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in both cases. Rav Sheshet raises an objection to both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish from a statement in the Mishnah with regard to one who slaughters for a Gentile when the intent of the Gentile is for idol worship. Rabbi Yossi says, the matter of the intent of the Gentile is irrelevant in this case, as it can be derived by a fortiori inference. Even a place where intent while slaughtering an animal invalidates the slaughter, i.e. in sacrificial animals, such as when slaughtering an offering with the intent to sacrifice beyond its designated time, everything followed only the intent of the priest performing the service and not the intent of the owner. Then in a place where intent does not invalidate slaughter, i.e. in non-sacred animals, it is not right that everything should follow only the intent of the one who slaughters the animal. Rishay should elaborate. What is the meaning of intent does not invalidate the slaughter in non-sacred animals? If we say that it means that intent does not invalidate the slaughter of non-sacred animals at all, but then how can you find a case of slaughter with intent for idol worship where the animal is forbidden? Rather, it is obvious that the meaning of that phrase in the statement of Rabbi Yossi is that one does not transfer intent from one sacrificial right to another sacrificial right. This is Rabbi Yossi saying, if in a place where intent invalidates, i.e. in sacrificial animals, from one sacrificial right to another sacrificial right, everything follows only that the intent of the one performing the slaughter and the intent of the owners is irrelevant. In a place where intent does not invalidate, i.e. non-sacred animals, from one right to another right, but it does so only within the same right. Is it not right that everything should follow only the intent of the one who slaughters the animal? According to the understanding of the contention of Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah, the case of the slaughter of a sacrificial animal inside the temple is difficult for Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. As contrary to his opinion, Rabbi Yossi says that in that case, one transfers intent from one sacrificial right to another sacrificial right. The case of slaughtering a non-sacred animal outside the temple is difficult for Rabbi Yochanan. As contrary to his opinion, Rabbi Yossi says that in that case, one does not transfer intent from one right to another right. Rav Sheshet continued. Granted, the case of inside the temple is not difficult for Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish because one can explain that he stated the statement that one does not transfer intent from one sacrificial right to another sacrificial right before he heard the Mishnah from Rabbi Yochanan, his teacher, and he stated that one transfers intent from one sacrificial right to another sacrificial right after he heard the Mishnah from Rabbi Yochanan. His dispute with Rabbi Yochanan is limited to the transfer of intent for idol worship from right to right. But the case of slaughter of non-sacred animal outside the temple is difficult for Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Sheshet raises an objection. What's the objection? I know he resolves it. That which Rabbi Yossi said, that intent inside the temple disqualifies the slaughter of a sacrificial animal, but intent outside the temple does not disqualify the slaughter of a non-sacred animal, is unrelated to the transfer of intent from one right to another. Well, Rabbi Yossi is referring to a case where one performs any of the four sacrificial rites. Another priest performs many actions in the course of sacrificing an offering. It is qualified only if the priest performs one of the four sacrificial rites with improper intent: slaughtering the offering, receiving its blood in a sacred vessel, taking the blood to the altar, and sprinkling the blood on the altar. Improper intent, e.g., to eat the offering beyond its appointed time, and this is what Rabbi Yossi is saying. If in a place where intent while slaughtering the animal invalidates the slaughter in the sacrificial animals, no intent was during the performance of any of the four sacrificial rites, i.e. slaughter, receiving the blood, conveying the blood to the altar, and sprinkling the blood on the altar, everything follows only the intent of the priest performing the service, and not the intent of the owner. Then in a place where intent invalidates the slaughter, a non-sacred animal is slaughtered with intent for idol worship during the performance of only two sacrificial rites, slaughtering and sprinkling the blood. Is it not right that everything should follow that the intent of the one who slaughters the animal? Yet it is taught in a Braita, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, with regard to one who slaughters an animal in order to sprinkle its blood. If one slaughters an animal with intent for idol worship, even if his intent was not to perform the slaughter of idol worship, but to sprinkle the blood or burn the fat for idol worship is prohibited by benefit from the animal, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and that's from the Rambam Sefer Kedush Hilchei Shechita 2:15, Chullin Daf Day 4:1. Idol worship, or to burn its fat for idol worship. The state of the animals is that of offering to the dead. Divrei Meisim, offering to the dead. The origin of this term is Psalms 106:28, where the Pentecost of worshiping the god Baal. Therefore, the phrase offering to the dead has been employed in reference to offering sacrifice to idols, i.e. gods who are dead, in contrast to the living or true God of Israel. Alternatively, the term alludes to the Canaanite practice of sacrificing animals to deceased people, in accordance with their belief that departed souls partake of the meat, i.e. to idols, and the slaughter is not valid. If one slaughtered the animal and thereafter intended, if one slaughtered an animal without any specific intent, and therefore thereafter intended to sprinkle its blood or burn its fat for idol worship, it is uncertain whether it is considered slaughter for idol worship or not. The animal's flesh is consequently forbidden. The later authorities disagree whether it is only consumption that is forbidden, or whether even benefit from it is forbidden. That's the Rambam Sefer Kedush Hilchei Shechita 2:16, therefore 2:8 there. In regard to sprinkle its blood or burn its fat for idol worship, that was the incident in Caesarea. Caesarea, a coastal city originally founded in the 4th century BC by Straton, one of Sidon, was originally known by the Greek name Stratonus Burgos, meaning Stratus Tower. Over time, the city's significance waned. Ultimately, Alexander Yanai conquered it and annexed it to Judea. This is commemorated by an annual celebration of Megalotanis. It was subsequently conquered by the Romans and eventually given to Herod by the Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar. In 30 BC, King Herod renovated the city and called it Caesarea in honor of his benefactor. Later, in the year 6 CE, the Romans established Caesarea as the administrative capital of Judea. Already most of Caesarea's residents were Gentiles, and even later, when the Jewish community grew, most of the time remained predominantly a Roman city. Nevertheless, particularly after the Bar Kokhba revolt, it was home to yeshiva and to leading Tanaim such as Bar Kapara and Rabbi Yoshai Rabbah, disciples of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. In the prominent Amoraim lived there, including Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina, and Bahu and his sons, Chanina Bar Papa, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, and Rabbi Chizkiah. Sections of the Jerusalem Talmud were apparently redacted in Caesarea, and Caesarea continued to function as it was significant and wealthy city until its destruction in the 13th century, and there's a picture of a hippodrome in Caesarea. When the sages did not say anything with regard to the animal, neither prohibition nor permission. Lo amubah, lo isa, lo heter. There is a dispute between the Amoraim and the Jerusalem Talmud in Gittin 6:6, and lo hisa as to the meaning of this statement. Some say that this indicates that there was no concern that led the sages to prohibit it in this case, as there had been a concern that they would have explicitly prohibited the animal. Others say that on the contrary, this indicated there was a concern that led the sages to prohibit the animal in this case, as if there was no concern, they would have explicitly permitted the animal. Now, history says in explanation of the conduct of the sages that they did not say this prohibition due to the honor of the rabbis in the Mishnah, who hold that the unspecified intent of a Gentile, and presumably likewise of a Jew who worshipped idols, is not presumed to be directed to idol worship, and therefore slaughter is valid. Nor does they say permission due to the honor of Rabbi Eliezer, who hold that the unspecified intent of Gentiles, and presumably likewise of a Jew who worshipped idols, is presumed to be directed to idol worship. The Gemara asks, from where is that conclusion drawn? Perhaps the rabbis say that the slaughter is permitted only there in the Mishnah, because we did not explicitly that Gentile intends to slaughter for idol worship. But here in the case in the Braita, where we hear therefore thereafter that he intends to sprinkle the blood or burn fat for idol worship, perhaps his ultimate statement proves the nature of his original intent while performing the slaughter. Alternatively, perhaps when Rabbi Eliezer states there in the Mishnah that slaughter was performed on behalf of a Gentile is not valid, and only with regard to an animal that is owned by a Gentile, and unspecified intent of a Gentile directed to idol worship. But in the case in the Baita where the animal belonged to a Jew, we do not say the ultimate statement proves the nature of his original intent. Rather, Rav Shavi said that the sages did not state permission with regard to the animal in a Baita due to the honor of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who holds that one's ultimate actions prove the nature of his original intent. Gemara asks, which statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel indicate that this is his opinion? If we say that the reference is to the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in regard to bill of divorce, this is difficult. As we learned in the Mishnah Gittin 66a, that if a diamond said to the people present, write a bill of divorce for my wife, and those people should write and deliver the bill of divorce to his wife, although the delivery was not included in his command, that is clearly his intent. But a healthy man who says, write a bill of divorce for my wife, get a bill of divorce, although the term get is employed with regard to all legal documents, its most common use is in relation to a bill of divorce. The basic text of a bill of divorce includes a declaration of the husband that he divorces his wife and that it is permitted for her to marry any other man. He is identified by his name and his father's name, and his wife is identified by her name and her father's name. The document must also include the date it was written and the signatures of two witnesses. In Talmudic time, the bill of divorce could be written privately by a scribe at the request of the husband. In the narration, it became customary for bill of divorce to be written by a rabbinical court. Expertise in this field so that no halacha difficulty would arise that could potentially invalidate the document. But did not say Nuna Victor, presumably sought to mock her and not to designate his listeners as agents of delivery. The Mishnah continues, and there was an incident involving a healthy man who said, write a bill of divorce to my wife. If a healthy man said, write a bill of divorce for my wife, the court writes, signs, and gives the bill of divorce to the husband. They do not do it to his wife until he explicitly instructs them to do so. If they gave it to his wife without the husband's explicit instructions, it is not a valid bill of divorce. If immediately after saying, write a bill of divorce for my wife, the husband killed himself, and he jumped up from a roof or threw himself into the sea, the bill of divorce is valid, as his ultimate actions prove the nature of his original intent. If he ascended the roof and the wind blew him off the roof and the court delivered the bill of divorce to his wife, the bill of divorce is not valid. That's the Rambam Sefer Noshim Rushin 2:12 to 13, Shochet Ezer 4:16 to 17, and then ascended to the roof and fell and died. Shimon ben Gamliel says, if he fell at his own initiative, taking his own life, it is a valid bill of divorce, as it is clear that he anticipated his death, thereby rendering his halachic status like that of a dying man. But if the wind forced him to fall and he died, it is not a valid bill of divorce, as there was no clear intent to give her the bill of divorce. And we discussed in the Mishnah, did the Tana cite an instance to contradict that which was previously stated in the Mishnah? Masa Listor. This is a common question raised when a Mishnah or Brisa cites an incident that appears to contradict the halacha that immediately precedes it. The incidents related in a Mishnah serve to reinforce the said halacha. It is not merely a theoretical statement, but a practical halacha. The Tana says unequivocally that when a healthy man says, write a bill of divorce to my wife, the bill of divorce is not valid. Then said indicated that under certain circumstances, the man says, write a bill of divorce for my wife, the bill of divorce is valid. No answers. The Mishnah is incomplete, and this is what it is teaching. Hasore michasra v'hachi kasane. This method of explanation is found throughout the Talmud, but as a rule, it is not proposed as an actual emendation of the text of the Mishnah. In addition, introduced by the Gemara is a necessary elaboration upon the Mishnah based on various difficulties raised in the Gemara, and when the Mishnah in its original form insufficiently clear or inconsistent with another authoritative source. The addition provides the necessary clarification. We all lost the place here. The healthy man who says, right, I believe divorce my wife, but he did not say deliver it to her, presumably sought to mock her. But if his ultimate actions prove the nature of his initial intent, then he seeks to give the bill of divorce because he is about to die, is a valid bill of divorce. And there was an incident involving a healthy man who said, right, I believe divorce my wife, and then he ascended to the roof and fell and died. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, if he fell at his own initiative, it is a valid bill of divorce. But if the wind forced him to fall, it is not a valid bill of divorce. The Gemara explains why this is not a proof. But perhaps the case cited there is different. As the husband initially says, "Write a bill of divorce for my wife," indicating that he originally intended to fall from the roof. By contrast, in the case of slaughter, there was no indication of his original intent. Rather, Ravina said that the sages did not state permission in the incident of Caesarea with regard to the animal duty honor of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, to avoid contradicting the opinion that is cited here. As this is taught in a Braita, in a case of a person on his deathbed who wrote a document transferring his property to others, and there were slaves, if one wrote a document signing over his possession to another, and then transferred them by means of a third party, and those possessions include slaves, and when the recipient hears of the gift, he is silent, but later shouts that he does not wish to accept it, nothing with regard to ownership of the slaves, as the case is subject to a dispute between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis as to whether his ultimate actions prove the nature of his original intent in the Mishnah. Therefore, whether the original owner is a priest and the recipient of a non-priest, or whether the original owner is a priest and the recipient is a priest, the original owner is a non-priest and the recipient is a priest, meaning for slaves to partake of teruma. One would say Ruma 9:6 among his property, and that intended recipient says, I do not want to assume ownership of the slaves. If their second master, the intended recipient, was a priest, these slaves may partake of teruma. By Torah, it is prohibited for non-priests to partake of teruma. Nevertheless, in certain cases, non-priest relatives or dependent of priests may partake of teruma. A male adult priest confers the right to partake of teruma to his wife, sons, unmarried daughters, Canaanite slaves, and animals. Permitted for a widow of a priest, who is not the daughter of a priest, to partake of teruma if she has children or grandchildren from a deceased husband. And the existence of five descendants enables not only the widow, but also the slaves continue partaking of teruma. Interesting. And then his protest is ignored. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, once that intended recipient says, I do not want to assume ownership of the slaves, heirs of the original owner already acquired them. This not refers specifically to their heirs, but rather indicates that the gift should be returned to the one who gave it. If that person is no longer alive, the gift should be returned to his heirs. According to this opinion, the gift never left the possession of the one who sought to give it to another person, to the Rashbam. We discussed the Braita. And according to the first Tana, does the intended recipient acquire the slaves even if he stands and shouts in protest that he does not want to assume ownership of the slave? That is not reasonable. Rabbi said, and some say it's Rabbi Yochanan who said, in a case where he shouts in protest at the outset, while the owner is giving him the gift, everyone agrees that he did not acquire the slaves. In a case where he was silent at that moment and ultimately shouted his protest at a later opportunity, everyone agrees that he acquired the slaves. When they disagree, in a case where the owner transferred ownership of the slaves to him through another person, and at that point the recipient was silent, and ultimately, when he actually received the slaves, he shouted in protest. If one transfers possession of a gift to another through an intermediary, and when the recipient heard of the gift, he is silent, but later shouts he does not wish to accept it, there is uncertainty whether his initial silence indicated acceptance and his current protest signified a change of heart, or whether his initial silence was due to the fact that he had not yet received anything, and his subsequent rejection is a reflection of his actual intent. Therefore, if another person takes possession of it, and reclaims that the court does not remove it from their possession. The uncertainty is based upon the uncertainty whether the halacha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Some of the Rosh rule that the halacha in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who hold that when typically silent first he acquires the gift, and one does not say his ultimate action to prove the nature of the original intent rather than say for Kenyan, Here, Matana 4:3, 245:11. See the Shach in the Quran there. The first Tana holds, since he was originally silent, he acquired the slave, and the fact that he is ultimately shouting indicates that he's retracting his initial acceptance of the gift. My child is effective as acquisition cannot be nullified in that manner. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel holds his ultimate actions prove the nature of his original intent. He never wanted the slaves and had always intended to avoid assuming ownership of them. And the fact that he did not shout initially is because he thought, as the situation that they did not yet enter my position, why would I shout? The Gemara resumes discussion of the dispute in the Mishnah where Rabbi Yossi says that when a Jew slaughters an animal on behalf of a Gentile, even if it is known that the intent of the Gentile is for idol worship, the slaughter is valid. And this is only the intent of the slaughter that is irrelevant. Rav Yehuda says that Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Normally, there were these Arabs who came to Sikunya, and they gave rams to Jewish slaughterers. The Arabs said to them, the blood and the fats are for us, for use in our idol worship, and the hide and flesh are for you. Rav Matana said a question to be asked before Rav. In a case like this was halacha. Rav said to him, this is what Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said. Halacha, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, is the intent of the slaughterer and not the intent of the owner that determines the validity of the slaughter. Rav Ahab, son of Rav Avia, said to Rav Ashi, according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, that if a Jew slaughters an animal on behalf of a Gentile, the slaughter is not valid, and the Gentile gave a dinar to the Jew slaughter in order to purchase a small amount of the meat, or the halacha, does that small amount invalidate the entire slaughter? Rav Ashi said to him, we examine the situation. If the Gentile is a violent man, the Jew is unable to repudiate his offer. Rashi explains that although when the Gentile hands the money to the Jew, the Gentile acquires a portion of the meat, the Jew could refund the money, and then the Gentile would no longer have a share in the animal. But if he is unable to refund the money, the Gentile has a share in the animal against the Jew's will, and the Jew cannot claim that he did not slaughter the animal on his behalf. And tell him to take his money. The entire animal is forbidden, because the slaughter was partially on behalf of the Gentile, and if the Gentile is not violent, the Jew can say to him, go and arrange a collision between your head and the mountain, as I will not slaughter an animal on your behalf. I don't know what that means. And then we'll just start the Mishnah. Is going to intersect with the next daf. In a case of one who slaughters an animal for the sake of it, i.e. to worship mountains for the sake of hills, or for the sake of seas, or for the sake of rivers, or for the sake of wildernesses, his slaughter is not valid. If there are two people grasping a knife, what does this mean? Someone explained that this refers to a case where both are holding the same knife. The Mishnah teaches that not only is a slaughter invalidated when each person is holding his own knife, but the performance of valid intent is independent of the slaughter with the intent that is not valid. And even if they are both holding the same knife and that act of slaughter, there is an element of valid intent, the slaughter is not valid, says Rashba. They explain that on the contrary, the reference is to a case where they slaughtered with two knives. And the Mishnah says to teach that not only is the slaughter not valid when they slaughter together with the same knife, where the person with the intent to slaughter for either which participates in the cutting of both simonim, and even in a case where each cut one simon with his own knife, and one simon was cut exclusively with valid intent, the slaughter is not valid. That's Rabbi Yonatan of Renel and the Meiri. They have together in slaughtering an animal, one slaughtering for the sake of one of those enumerated in the first clause of the Mishnah, and one slaughtering for the sake of a legitimate matter, the slaughter is not valid. In a case where two people slaughter a single animal, whether they are both holding different ends of the same knife, or whether each cuts one of them with his own knife, if one of them has intended to slaughter for the purpose that invalidates the slaughter is not valid. This is the halacha, provided that each has a share in the animal. The slaughter is not invalidated by the intent of one without a share in the animal, and is not when forbidden an animal that it is not his. The zay is merely to torment the owner in accordance with the Gemara Dayton 41a. Some say that even when both have a share in the animal, it is possible that he does not intend to slaughter the animal for the sake of idol worship, desires to torment the other, therefore the animal is permitted. There are more writers, some hold that it is permitted in any case, in any event, due to the appearance of a problem to be serious society in the version at all. One should adopt the stringent ruling, Ramban Sefer Kedush Shachit 221 Shulchan Aruch 453. And that's the end of the daf. Thank you for joining me, and I wish you a very good day, and peace to all Israel. May the Prophet end very soon.